Well, it's been a while since we talked about the U.S. southern border, and there's been a lot happening down there. We're going to bring in an expert to talk about it on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Oh man, we got a thunderstorm. Hey folks, there's so much that's been happening down on the U.S. southern border with the immigration debate since the last time we talked about it on the Hot Zone. As you know, I've been so busy trotting around the world that we haven't had a chance to talk about the immigration issue and the crisis on our southern border very much. But a friend of mine, Todd Bensman, has been keeping real close track of it. As a matter of fact, he's been down there visiting the border. So I wanted to talk to him on the podcast today. So let's welcome Todd Bensman from the Center for Immigration Studies. Todd, thanks for being with us.
Sure. Good to be here.
So tell me a little bit about your recent trip down to the border and what you found and just what the situation is there right now.
I've been spending time with migrants who have been kicked back from entering the U.S. So they're in Mexico. I went to Juarez first to see firsthand what the impact of Trump's return, or it's called Remain in Mexico, or the migrant protection protocols. What I found there was that the policy was working pretty well at deterring migrants from even wanting to be in the area. Basically, the migrants that I interviewed in Juarez wanted to go in Mexico because, after all, the point of coming to the United States right now was that you could achieve the holy grail of living illegally in the United States forever.
Power on.
So you would have an entry, you'd seek out a border patrol agent, request asylum. Asylum is bogus because most Central Americans are ineligible for asylum, but once you're in, you then are released quickly, especially if you have a child, and then you're here illegally, which is just as good as being here legally as far as most Central American migrants are concerned. But what was happening is that they are now pushed back, in many of them, about 30,000 now, are pushed back into Mexico. And if they lose their asylum cases, they're in Mexico, not the United States. Not cool. They're going to go back to their intolerable homelands, places that they said they were in imminent danger of, quick death, violent death, which is why they left. But when I asked them, why do you want to go back? Why don't you go to Argentina or stay in Mexico or go to Costa Rica, which is a pretty nice, welcoming country? The answer was, we just want to go home. So the United Nations has a bus transportation program where they've loaded probably about 2,500 of these return to Mexican migrants onto the buses, and they drive them all the way back to their home countries. Now, that was one aspect of the impact of return to Mexico that I was able to personally document by interviewing the migrants who are affected. Last week, I went to another town in further, probably a couple hundred miles south on the Rio Grande called Piedras Negras. That town is just across from Eagle Pass. And interrupt me anytime here if you have a question. But
yeah, this is good. I mean, I've been to Piedras Negras, and so I know exactly where you're talking about. In Eagle Pass, we've done several ride-alongs with the sheriffs and police out there. The last time I was in Piedras Negras, the police or the state troopers and that sort of thing were being told to sort of stand down, and really the only people, and even Border Patrol was being told to stand down because it was the last year of the Obama administration, and the Border Patrol couldn't do anything. So the only people that were doing any enforcement of the law were the sheriffs down there, who are only beholden to their constituents. What did you find when you were there?
When I went over when I crossed the river, what I found was I think a representative sample of what you would find in many border crossing towns in northern Mexico, which was a bunch of Hondurans that were staging for a crossing, probably about 12 or 13 Hondurans, and they were getting ready. They were going to go either that night or the following morning, and one of them had scouted a location. Now, what was interesting about these migrants, once you kind of start talking to them, is that they have not yet been across. They are anticipating being thrown back. So, whereas previously they would actively seek out any uniformed American officer and declare asylum, all of these ones were going to try to evade Border Patrol. This was like completely a new tactic.
Yeah, so this is a big change because before the Border Patrol was essentially the welcome wagon that we would pick them up. And once they had crossed illegally into the United States, then we have to decide if they're going to get asylum or not. That could take years. And in the meantime, we can't keep them in detention the entire time. We don't have the space. So we just let them go. So they knew they would get at least a couple of years in the U.S. to make some money and form a new life before they even had a decision on their asylum claim. But now we're not allowing them to come in. So now they have to evade and get into the U.S. But does it still work that way? If they evade and they get caught in Cleveland or someplace, does it still work the same? We still have to keep them and let them have an asylum hearing?
Well, there's defensive asylum. So, eventually they would claim asylum in Cleveland or wherever they end up. But it would be very difficult to compel them to show up for their hearings. So they would just simply move and disappear again. Or if they lost, it would be next to impossible to actually deport them. We have over 1 million people like that living in the country under active final deportation orders, and it's just near impossible, and everybody knows it, to deport once you're in the interior. These migrants were planning to evade and get in, and they didn't really care what happened after that. They just wanted to get away from the Border Patrol, and they're going to become runners. Now, how many people are doing that? How many of these migrants are doing that? No idea whatsoever. But anecdotally, I did interview 3 or 4 active duty Border Patrol agents, and I asked them, are you seeing return to Mexico people or Central Americans trying to evade you now, trying to run from you now? And the answer is universally yes. This is a new thing that the Border Patrol is contending with down there with Central Americans, a new tactic. So I thought that was interesting, but I think overall that the return to Mexico policy and also some other policies like the one having to do with requiring that they apply for asylum in the first country that they enter is having another psychological effect on these migrants where they're realizing we are just not going to get in. We're not going to get in. So I think the policies are having an impact, the desired impact, on slowing things down a little bit.
Right, but you ran into a whole bunch of Africans there in camps, people from Cameroon and that sort of thing. Those people, it's going to be a lot harder for them to go back to Cameroon or anywhere near there. So what do those people plan to do?
Right, so last week I went across at a different point, not far from Eagle Pass, but in Del Rio, which is about an hour upriver. Del Rio, across from Del Rio is Acuna. The town of Acuna is about 150,000. And on the banks of the Rio Grande there in Acuna, an encampment has developed as a result of this other policy that we call metering. This is like one of the very first ones. And basically we're saying, if you're going to apply for asylum, you have to do it at a port of entry, and we have to invite you one at a time, or 2 or 3 at a time, as it's convenient for us for you to make your asylum claim. So the ones that are willing to be compliant with that were in this camp. There were Cameroonians, Angolans, Congolese, and also quite a few Cubans and Venezuelans, which we hadn't seen a lot of. There were also reportedly a few Brazilians, but I hadn't met them. So I interviewed a lot of the Cameroonians, and I also met a Russian there, a single Russian, a young, probably about a 32-year-old man from Sakhalov Island, which is on the border with Japan, like a really far-flung province of Russia.
So why would Russians come to come to the United States through Mexico? That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, this particular Russian explained to me that he had had problems with the police back home. He wouldn't go into a whole lot of details about that, so he's probably thinking somewhere along the lines that, I've got a police problem on my record. I'm not really sure why, but
so we're definitely going to want him then if he's a wanted criminal in Russia. Yeah, bring him on. That's what we want.
Look, my article that I wrote about my trip into Acuna and spending time with those what we call extraterritorial or extracontinental migrants. I came away with the idea that we really need to, our Homeland Security people, when we do entertain their asylum claims, and of all the migrants that are coming in, if anybody has a valid asylum claim, might have a valid asylum, like a real one compared to completely bogus, a scam claims like the Central Americans make, it's going to be these guys because they're coming from places that are just absolutely war-torn. It's documented. There are rampaging, government forces and militias, and you're being actually persecuted because of your tribal affiliations, and they're going to make asylum claims. But what I argue is that we should be very careful about waving Cameroonians through or Congolese through and allowing them release on low bonds into the country pending their asylum claims, because we don't really know anything about the Cameroonians or the Congolese that are coming in. They could be persecutors, war criminals. Human rights organizations are having a field day. This is paying their utility bills for the next 100 years, what's going on in Cameroon and in Congo. Just awful atrocities.
Yeah, and I mean, to say nothing of the fact that in Congo especially, there's a big problem with Ebola right now. That could be bad.
That's another issue. And so my point is, of my column that's going to run, is that I'm urging that ICE hold these people, not wave them through, make sure that they get some bed space, at least for them, so that they can do security screening, dump the cell phones, make some calls back to Cameroon, or maybe some friendly governments and police forces over there, whatever we can do to ensure that we're not letting war criminals in or people that have a lot of blood on their hands.
So how many people were in this camp
victims
that you visited over there?
There are about 200 to 300 in there.
Wow, just in that one camp. Now,
that one. Yeah.
So if they're not able to come in, what are they going to do? I mean, like I said, they don't have the money to go back to Cameroon, and as if they would want to.
Well, they can set up shop in Mexico, or try to set up shop in any of a number of other countries that are certainly safer than Cameroon, or safer than Nigeria, for that matter. A lot of them claimed that they had been refugees. They'd gone over to Nigeria to escape the bloodshed there, and then they had to escape there too, according to them. None of these stories are, of course, verifiable from where I'm sitting. But I'm just saying there is a security concern with people from Cameroon and Congo, and hundreds of them are coming in, and also the Cubans. There are a lot of Cubans there. The reason that so many, I did not know this before I interviewed about 4 or 5 Cubans. I'd never interviewed Cubans before, because we just figure we know all about we know why they're coming, and they've been coming forever. They've been coming for decades. So, but I decided to interview some, and what I learned was really surprising. Apparently the Nicaraguans and the Cubans have set up a diplomatic arrangement whereby any Cuban who wants to can fly visa-free to Managua now, and that's been going on for about 6 months. So all the Cubans that I met there, instead of have this horrible, rickety boat trip across to the Yucatan peninsula, dangerous and, all of that. They just fly directly to Managua, and then they catch a flight to Mexico City and, make their way to the border. All of them had done that. And each one of them had paid about maybe $1,000 to the Cuban government. So it's a cash cow for the cash poor Cuban government.
They paid $1,000 to the Cuban government so that they could get permission to leave Cuba. Is that right?
Yes.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So Cuba is essentially selling its people to and using that to fund their government, and then dumping them all on us. That's unbelievable. That was something I didn't know. Now,
I didn't need. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask you to, as we wrap up here, would you say that Trump's policies are having an effect on the number of people coming across?
Yes, I would say, and I don't have the data yet, but when you interview the migrants, front and center on their minds is, oh my God, how am I going to get around this new policy? The Russian that I talked to, that I met down there, he and I are still in communication on WhatsApp. His primary concern right now, from when I met him in the camp a week ago, is this new policy being implemented that they have to apply for asylum in Mexico, which was the first place they showed up. And they're scared. They're like, we're not going to get to the United States. We're stuck in Mexico. It's all they think about. So to actually get on the ground and talk to the migrants and see how it's playing psychologically with them, I think is incredibly important. That we need to, this is how they make decisions. The decision making to even leave their home countries is all based on what the Americans are doing with their border policy, how easy it is to get in, as you know.
Yeah, well, and what it comes down to is not even the reality of how easy it is to get in. It's more about the perception of how easy it is to get in from their point of view that will either encourage more or stop them from coming. So I think it's encouraging to hear that it's having an effect, at least. And well, I'd like to talk to you some more about it. We'll have you on again soon. We're out of time, but thank you very much, Todd, for the hard work you're doing, taking the risk of going down there. Hope we get a chance to go down there together sometime soon.
Yep, good to be here.
All right.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.